You are listening to the Ready PDM Network.
Are you ready?
Hello, Ready Product Radio heads, and welcome to another exciting episode of Ready Product Radio. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at readyproductradio.com. And if you get value from this podcast, consider becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/readyproductradio. This week, we welcome back longtime product person turned entrepreneur, Balaji Gopalan. If you haven't heard Bal on episode 14, then definitely check that out as well. This week, Bal talks to us about his journey and transition from product person to entrepreneur in his new role as co-founder and CEO of MedStack. Ready Product Principle number 19 is, being an entrepreneur is optional, but thinking and acting like one is mandatory. Enjoy the show. Balaji Gopalan, welcome back to Ready Product Radio. You and I talked back on episode 14. You just corrected me. So I certainly strongly suggest listeners to this go back and listen to that episode. Some good stuff. So, Bal, last time we spoke, we talked a lot about creating a product management culture. You were doing teaching. We're here again at the BrainStation facility in Toronto. So thanks to them for hosting us. You were teaching an evening class during that time, which I was really amazed with how much you crammed in there. But I thought it'd be good today to catch up because you've actually kind of changed your focus a little bit, I understand. So maybe before we jump into that, you can just reintroduce yourselves for folks that didn't listen to the first episode. I'm going to mention that today is actually a special day in the podcast world. It's International Podcast Day.
Oh, wow.
So
okay,
let's celebrate that.
For sure.
Thanks for taking the time. But why don't you start by reintroducing yourself, and then let's talk about what you're up to these days.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Alan. It's a real pleasure to be back on the show. I had a real blast the last time, so happy to do it again, and happy International Podcast Day. That's fantastic. I feel like there's this new weight on my shoulders. I've got to step up to podcast listeners and followers all around the world. So again, my name is Balaji Gopalan. I've been doing product management for a really, really long time. It's a discipline very, very close to my heart. But I've gone on an interesting journey over the last year or so. So first of all, we are at BrainStation, and I am still teaching here. Very proud of that. I think I have to get those fact checkers to check me. This may be our 10th cohort of the class.
Awesome.
We've now expanded to 2 nights, as well as the class running in Vancouver. And I'm having a blast. Our current cohort we just had 2 classes out of the 10. The third one was next Tuesday. Is ironically the most advanced class I've ever had of experienced product managers. So it's really, really interesting discussions. And I'm learning a lot just by hanging out with them. But what I'm doing during the day has shifted quite a bit. I think the last time we spoke, I'd been doing some consulting, and that's sort of since evolved. So now I'm an entrepreneur. In the full sense of the word. So I'm spending my day at an early stage tech startup as the co-founder and CEO of this company, MedStack. And I guess one of the things I want to talk about is how our approach to product is actually being taken in this company, because we've had a couple of surprising turns, and I've learned a lot in the process as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. So before we jump into that, just if people are interested as a reference point for BrainStation, so it's brainstation.io.
.io, that's right.
And it's all about training in many disciplines, not just product management. And currently classes in both Toronto and Vancouver?
Toronto and Vancouver, and there's places opening up in other parts of the world as well.
Awesome.
New York is a big focus right now.
Okay, cool. So congratulations on becoming an entrepreneur.
Thank you.
That's very exciting, and I like that's great, because I love to have entrepreneurs on the show because it is a lot in my experience and what Pragmatic has often said over the years. Entrepreneur is a good logical next step for a product person, because the breadth and the scope of the role are very similar. So talk to us about your role as an entrepreneur and founder.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I had the fortune of sitting down with a group of CTOs and product management leaders in the startup community in Toronto at a dinner a couple of nights ago, actually. And that was one of the topics of conversation, is where do product managers go from big companies?
Yeah.
And there was a consensus about the fact that well, entrepreneurship is a natural next step. Product managers love to create things, and there's no more creative an environment than product management. Than entrepreneurship. And I'd actually even say that creativity is the most important thing that an entrepreneur can bring to the table. And what a great place to hone it than product management. So I was at another startup doing platform management and product management in the platform space. And we had this software developer kit we were building out. This company was called NIMI. As we were building out, we decided to run a little hackathon just to make sure that people could use it the way they wanted to. It's kind of almost the developer version of user testing.
Right.
And we had this little night where we brought a bunch of people in and had some pizza and beer and let people play with it. And this gentleman came and built the best demo in the room. I was really impressed at what he was doing. Again, just incredible creativity with just a little bit of information. And he just seemed to have so much fun doing it as well. I said, well, this guy's really interesting. I'd like to work with him one day. Little did I know what that would actually lead to.
What you wish for.
Yeah. So his name is Simon Woodside, and he was CEO of an agency, a custom app development studio based in Waterloo called Monolith Interactive. We would actually later find out that Simon and I had many mutual connections. So we shook hands and we did a little bit of an interview with him for our collateral and our marketing and went our separate ways. And then many months later, when I would leave NIMI, he called me and said, "Do you remember me? My name's Simon." I said, "Oh yeah. What are you doing these days?" He said, "Well, I was going to ask you the same question." So Simon in Monolith had the opportunity of diving into healthcare. They built an application for a hearing aid company. It was a hearing aid test with actually many, many, many users around the world. They built an application for an insurance company and a few others in this space, and came to appreciate that building applications in healthcare is much harder than building applications in any other spaces. So one of the things that I talk about, for example, in the product management course, and we talked about last time, is when you're building a product strategy, it's important to understand your customers. It's important to understand your competitors, but it's also important to understand your development process, right? Both technical and non-technical, how products are actually created in your company, and what are the steps to getting there? Because what they actually found out is that building a healthcare application requires a number of steps that don't exist in other industries, and they thought, well, is this just us? And Simon started speaking to some other entrepreneurs and realized that wasn't the case. It's a common problem. So they curated a platform to address this issue for themselves, and then said, well, maybe we have an opportunity here. And he played back in his memory meeting me when I was at NIMI and said, well, here's a guy who loves platforms, who loves talking about platforms. And I mean, it is still a product management thing. When you have a tool set as an enabler of technology, what can that help you as a creator to actually do? Right. So that's something that really jazzes me. And he remembered that, and he called me up and said, "Do you want to run this company with me?"
Awesome.
So I said, okay. And we did it for a few months while doing other things. And then earlier on this year, we had an opportunity to go all in on this project via acceptance into an accelerator. And so, I threw caution to the wind, which was hard to do at 40 something.
Exactly.
But it was one of those things where I sort of said, well, this is an adventure I've never had before, and I really like to be challenged. And I'm going to learn a lot. So we decided to pursue it, and it's been a really fun journey since then. The surprising thing is, as we began to work together, we're very different, the two of us, which has been really fun. We actually decided the right structure, which is kind of what I want to talk about today.
Sure.
For the company was, he was actually going to take on product, and I was going to take on sales and business development, which is hilarious.
Wait a second, you're the product guy.
Well, yeah. So I'm the product guy, and he's a product guy too. But I mean, this is kind of what I've done for a long time.
Exactly.
And what was his role in the previous company? Sales. So now we just switched.
Yeah, that's good.
But there was a very important reason for that.
Yeah. So let me just pause there, Bal, and unpack some of what you were saying there. So a couple of things struck me with what you were saying. Number one is, I think there's a mythology out there that most entrepreneurs are younger, but actually I've seen a lot of stats, and I'd be interested if you have as well, that really most entrepreneurs are actually in their 40s, and come to it with a wealth of experience. I imagine that's certainly your case. The other thing that I found interesting with what you're saying is I've spoken with other entrepreneurs on the podcast, and definitely that chemistry, especially when you have two people, like two co-founders, that chemistry, from what I understand, is really key. So yeah, if you can talk a little bit about that.
For sure.
And especially with this twist that you're kind of switching roles, that's kind of cool. So yeah, how's that working in practice? Is it requiring some new muscle, some new muscles, some new...
Yeah, for sure. And it's almost been like... It's been a little while since I've been in a position where I've worked this closely and collaboratively with one other person.
Yeah.
I've always worked in teams, and it's something that, as you know, that I get really excited about. But usually my position is quite independent from everybody else, and especially when I became a consultant. But this is really different, and it's required a whole new dynamic, and I've had to completely reinvent my approach to my career. Mm-hmm. We're a very, very small early company. We don't have an office yet, even, right? Mm-hmm. We're sitting in incubators and co-working spaces. Pardon me, but we don't even live in the same city. Mm-hmm. So I live here in Toronto, and my partner lives in Hamilton, which is actually, as I would come to learn, a hotbed for healthcare software technology in Canada. Some amazing things going on over there with Hamilton Health Sciences and St. Joe's and the Innovation Factory and some other places like that, which he's very heavily involved in. And so, we've had to kind of figure out this cadence and dynamic by which we share information and kind of dive and live in each other's thoughts and provide feedback. We're very candid with each other, and we think really differently. I mean, just go back in the career. I've been doing sort of product management at big companies for a long time, and then building product culture at startups like, growth level startups like Nimi and EventMobi. Yep. And he spent a bit of time at Apple, but that was the extent of his corporate experience. He was down there and he says, "This ain't for me," right? Which a lot of entrepreneurs feel, and then this MedStack is now his third startup, including the agency. And so he's had this kind of way of doing things, and I've had a way of doing things, and we're both right. But now we have an opportunity to look at everything that comes to us, which in the space in which our company operates is kind of new to both of us from the perspective of where our experiences have been. Everything from enabling developers to selling to hospitals. Right? There's a bunch of new stuff in there, to running a SaaS platform in a very kind of consumery traditional sense. And so we look at every opportunity together at this point and bounce ideas off each other. We almost invariably we see different things, which is great. It's because then we learn what we need to do. We knew, and we also got some external feedback on this from advisors and the accelerator and a bunch of other people, that we would have to figure out and learn how to appreciate those differences, right, and then turn it into a conversation. And so while we spend time looking at things and we look at them differently, we then know there's a decision-making process around what the nature of the decision is and which one of us should actually tackle it. And that comes to why we agreed on the corporate structure we have now, which is not where we started. Right. We actually evolved it. And it was a matter of just taking a deep breath and going, you know what, like we're a bit unusual maybe in the sense that we're not like lifelong friends. Yeah. We've come together because we recognized this opportunity, what we could do together. And we sat and said, well, what are we each other good at? And we forced ourselves to go, well, I know what he's good at. He knows what I'm good at. And I came to realize as a product guy, I know what it takes to be successful in product because I've done it for a long time. Yep. And one of those things is a deep appreciation and confidence and competency in the technical space that we're operating in. Right. Well, he's been doing it for a while. He's been building healthcare applications for 8 years. And I mean, there's no better evidence for product manager than somebody who is the customer. And he was who we were selling to more than me. Yeah. And so I said, well, that would be an amazing opportunity to put it in there. And it's funny, when we were talking with the structure, it was me that came up with the idea. I said, why don't you be our product officer? And he looked at me cross-eyed and goes, you're the product guy. You want me to be the product officer? And I said, yeah, because nobody understands our requirements better than you. And the two of us and our advisors and part-time contractors and employees that we have, I can bring a competitor to the table. So I did the market analysis when he brought the idea to me, and I said, well, here are our competitors. Yeah. And he immediately looked at them and said, well, here are the 5 things they're missing. And I'm like, I never would have figured that out that quickly. Yeah. It's a perfect role for you. And anybody that comes to our company needs to be inspired, especially if we bring on developers and product managers and product marketers, needs to be inspired by the vision for what we're trying to change in the industry. And you've got it way better than I could. Now, what I'm really good at is taking his vision and turning it into a story. So I played up on my experience as an evangelist at BlackBerry, at NIMI, that short stint I had at this company called Quirk, and Event Mobi, when we were building, for example, the live display project. I can tell a story for how a product will change the world better than he can. And so, that's when we sort of agreed to said, well, maybe, we're equal co-founders in the company, but my role should be the CEO, because CEO is typically the external face of the vision of the product. But knowing what needs to be done in terms of product development is definitely his role. And now it's worked really well, because now we know what questions to ask each other. Yeah. And I can use my product experience to question him, and he can use his sales experience to question and train me, and he does, and it's awesome, because I'm learning something new every single day.
Yeah, that's great. So it's good that you've got that diversity of perspectives, because I forget who said it, but I love that old expression that when two agree, one is unnecessary, right? So, and definitely when you only got 2 people, it'd be a bit of shame from a coverage perspective if you agreed on everything, because then obviously you're leaving some stuff on the table.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah, that's great that you have that dynamic. So what specifically are you focusing on right now? Then you mentioned sales. Is that the main thing? Business development, sales, telling the story, as you said?
Right. Another thing that's a little bit unusual about MedStack, given how old we are as a company, we're about a year old, is
how young you are. Yeah.
How young we are. I'm used to saying old. Yeah. How young we are is the fact that, because the very core technology, which I can get into, is a cloud service for hosting private health data. Was curated in the agency. We started out with 2/3 of an MVP to begin with. And so we've actually managed to build a product we can sell, and we have sales already. And so, you're never done, right? So we're both big subscribers of lean product development and constant learning in the iterative loop. And so we're just trying to get in front of as many people as we can, to know what else we need to add to the product to make sure that it's successful. And our measure of success is more people going into healthcare as innovators, and healthcare developers getting to market faster. So my role has been building out our story, our value proposition, which we kind of did under the covers for a while, and now we're turning it into marketing. Everything from the messaging on our website to what we tell people, how we act on social media, and some of the collaterals that we're actually building. So I've been responsible for that, as well as sourcing strategic partners for channel, as well as investment in the company, and finding opportunities to find these customers and bringing them to the table. And we've even kind of built out the sales process, which we're still iterating on, in terms of what I can tell them, what we do, and how we want to solve their problems and make them successful. And then they kind of go, well, okay, how does it work, and how would I actually use it? And this is something that he can come in and tell the story, because that's what he does.
Yeah, for sure. So your kind of official title, you're mentioning is CEO?
Co-founder and CEO.
Co-founder and CEO, okay. You're focusing a lot on message development and sales. So like, given it's a platform, is your customer other healthcare application providers? Is that your customer base?
Yeah, well, we've actually iterated on that too. We have kind of a concentric circle model for our market development, which is exciting on its own, because each step is a question around whether we're getting closer to the outside circle.
Right.
At the moment, and the thing that inspired us, so categorically is where we started and where he started, was this idea that people are building healthcare apps. There are some people out there, they are building healthcare apps. By healthcare app, what I mean is a digital technology that sources, shares, and manages private protected health information. Everything from, your blood pressure to your medication to your doctor's appointments, for example. And they face this complexity. And the two areas of complexity that we specifically address are compliance with health data privacy legislation, which is a very complicated space on its own, and it's constantly evolving. There is nothing more, may or may not know this, there's nothing more sensitive in the digital realm than health data.
Yep.
It's said to be worth, for example, I mean, kind of a dire way of looking at it, but on the black market, a health record is worth 100 times more than a credit card.
Yeah.
Because you can imitate anybody as soon as you get their health data, especially in the US, but even to a degree in Canada.
Yeah.
So those laws are very complicated. They weren't written by software people, and they're constantly evolving. Our experience is that it can take a company $150,000 a year to manage compliance with healthcare privacy laws. That's only one of the problems we solve. So once you're actually a compliant application, the next question is your sales model is built on getting a health system to adopt your product. If you're not selling it to anybody in healthcare, you're just in what we call consumer wellness, which is like sleep trackers and fitness trackers and diet trackers. Very important space, but that's not what we call a healthcare application. It's a wellness application.
Right.
So this space where a health system, such as a hospital or a clinic or an insurance company, can use the data is where we really see value. And like a lot of older industries, people often talk about energy, financial services, healthcare, government, and education. They have these old processes and old systems, and the people who work in that work very, very hard and are focused less on technology and more on the operations of their job. In this case, managing patients, are trained to use certain systems, such as, for example, an electronic medical record system. And they're like, "Great, your application produces data. It's not useful to me unless it integrates with my system."
Right.
That integration is really hard. It's really hard for a few reasons. One, we've got a series of vendors in the space. And then even within a single vendor, the implementation from one hospital to the next is completely different and customized, as is often the case with enterprise software. It's not something as clean as, like, say, Salesforce. And then on top of that, healthcare IT, because of the pressures of dealing with old systems, because of the pressures of security, they're not typically very platform friendly, right? And no fault of their own. So this can drown a startup trying to move into the health space, but by these two big barriers actually getting into market. So that's the second issue that we solve, which is integration into healthcare systems. We use a data standard to overlay on top of all these other things and make integration 60% faster.
Nice.
So we help these guys get to market quicker, and then we charge a small monthly fee for that. But the long-term play is building an ecosystem of integrated applications that are aligned on a common data model that allows us to flip the model and then go to the hospitals directly and say, well, what if you integrated our platform, and now all these application developers will come to you. They'll speak your language. They'll integrate your systems, and your physicians and nurses and therapists now have this suite of digital technologies to provide care for their patients.
That's really interesting. So what's the geographic scope of what you're focusing on, Bal?
Yeah, great question. It's defined primarily by legislation and security culture, right?
Laws are probably different in Canada than the US.
Well, in actual fact, the compliance laws are consistent in the US around this thing called HIPAA.
Exactly, I've heard of that before.
Health Insurance Protection Privacy Act. I think.
Exactly.
I might be saying that wrong. And then, Accountability Act. And then in Canada, actually, the laws are different in the different provinces.
Okay.
And so, I wouldn't say that they're as stringent in terms of their specific definition of what you need to do as HIPAA, but they are evolving. And so we focused on Ontario to start with. We're starting to look at the other provinces. Chances are the privacy policies we've built in Ontario will work. We probably need to do a couple of different things in Manitoba and the Maritimes, but we have some customers that are moving us in that direction. And then probably mid to late 2017, we'll start looking at the rest of the world. We have some emergent opportunities in Australia and the Netherlands. As everybody probably knows, Germany will be a challenge on its own. They have very different views of privacy over there that we would need to respect and be compliant with to get this to work. And what's interesting is that in other nations, they don't have these laws in place yet, but they're probably modeling off of the US and building this out. The other complexity that we have to deal with is there's the laws, but there's also what the customer base will actually accept. And for example, healthcare systems in Canada have a preference for the data being not being hosted in the U.S.
Right, exactly.
Because of the Patriot Act.
Exactly.
And so while the law doesn't stipulate that, to be very, very clear, we know that the hospitals expect it, and so we have an infrastructure in Canada to support that.
Brought to you by Under 10 Playbook. This episode brought to you by Under 10 Playbook, a cloud-based software solution with on-site workshops that ensure your team is systematic in their methods and consistent in their deliverables. From business planning to product launch, Under 10 Playbook is the ultimate smart notebook for managing software products, empowering you to work smarter and collaborate better with development and marketing teams.
That accordingly.
Yeah,
and a lot of what we do, based on my partner's experience and some partners we have, is education, because this is a space people don't really understand.
Exactly.
Both the importance of protecting privacy, and I'm going beyond the regulation, which we do, in terms of digital security, in terms of privacy, really smart management of data, as well as the fact that yes, it's important, yes, it's complicated, but it doesn't be hard to do, and we can make it easier for people. So that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So we're starting it with the US and Ontario with a plan to expand from there.
Yeah. Remind me, Bal, in Ontario, there was a bit of a scandal in terms of a program, I think related to healthcare, electronic healthcare records.
Yes.
Remind me what that was called, and is that resolved now? Or I guess another way I could look at it is Ontario ahead of some of the other provinces in terms of electronic healthcare records? That might be a more positive way to ask it.
Yeah. Well, so there's a push certainly in the US, and there's a push in Canada for the adoption of EMRs, and you've got organizations like TELUS that are really pushing hard to provide an infrastructure for these kinds of things. We do have some advantages because it's a government legislated operation around healthcare, but it also makes integration a little more difficult.
Yeah.
I would say are we further ahead in Ontario? We're pretty far ahead. I think I remember I was in an event in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I think there was a statement that they have, in that region, they have 80% coverage of health systems using EMRs, which is pretty impressive. I know BC has made a lot of inroads in this space as well. There's a lot of healthcare innovation happening out there. We still have a long way to go, as does most of the world around this technology. And there are different vendors in Canada versus the US as well, which we have to look at. And the other complexity is that, and in terms of a large hospital level, the implementation or change of an EMR vendor, I was astonished when I heard this. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars is what it takes. I can't quote specific numbers, but I heard the numbers supposedly that the University Health Network used, that Sick Kids used, and then I know South Lake up in Markham has just gone through an EMR change, I believe, and these are massive projects. And so it's good in the sense that there's a business case to even expend that much, because we know the value that can be created over digitizing these processes that exist on paper for so long.
Yeah, and the other kind of cultural thing that comes to mind is when the U.S. government contracted CGI to put in the enrollment for the U.S. based healthcare system, and I just mention it because, like you say, I imagine, I don't know the number, but I imagine like literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, were spent on that, and it's not easy, right?
No.
As we saw, the website kept going down, and
that whole thing. I mean, that's just a small part of it too. It's like
exactly. That's just the front end. You get people enrolled.
The reason these processes are so complicated, and these these vendors who built these systems are doing very, very well, is because the digitization of a manual process in a multifaceted organization like a hospital requires adoption of workflows that are in line with what that hospital is used to doing.
Right.
Everything from how you requisition an X-ray to how you track who's visited the patient, how you do handovers, to where does the prescriptions go in terms of where they're recorded? How do you record vitals, and how do you incorporate technologies and systems that they might have? That's why there's so much fragmentation. It's so different from one to the other. And even we're still learning, what it actually takes. Some of these sales cycles can be a year.
Yeah.
Another reason why we've sort of said, well, maybe our beachhead market is these startups who often come to us and they go, you know what? I've got a hospital waiting to adopt my technology. Yep. They just need compliance and they need integration. Great. We have a path to a customer immediately. Nice. Let's leverage that. And that's actually worked well for us.
Yeah. So let's turn, and if we can, Bal, now and talk about the platform, because I'm seeing that being very popular right now. A lot of blogs and whatnot saying, don't build a product, build a platform. For sure. Products are dead end or whatever. Platforms are much more sustainable, extensible. So talk to me about what you've noticed to be the difference in building a platform versus building a product. What are some of the unique challenges there?
Yeah, and this is kind of what I've done for a really long time, it's interesting because I take a very kind of business approach to platform. There's the developer experience and the tools you need to offer, but it excites me tremendously, and it's kind of what I've always wanted to do, right back from the platform we built on top of BlackBerry Messenger to the work that we did at NIMI, which was a platform. My focus at Desire to Learn was platform, and so there is definitely a renaissance and focus on these kinds of things, because I think people have come to accept that growth in the technology innovation space is organic now. More and more people, you don't even have to force them. People are coming in and becoming technology entrepreneurs faster and faster every day. And the enabler of that growth has been platforms. And there's no shortage of examples. Everything from Amazon that provides infrastructure, to Heroku that provides deployment services, to Stripe that manages payments, to device platform interfaces, like say with stuff that Apple does with Swift or PhoneGap, and I heard that there's a term in Silicon Valley for this stuff, and they call it picks and shovels, which is kind of fun, right? So there's an appreciation of the fact that if you're a company that leverages network effects to help other companies be successful, we know those other companies are going to exist because people want to do this stuff, and you can actually prove that you can do that. That's actually very interesting. So we've seen that reaction from people we've talked to. Okay, well, you're making it easier for these developers to get to market. And the usual typical questions apply, what's your market size, and what's the opportunity, what's the selling model? The tricky thing, especially when you're starting out as a platform, is your stuff is kind of invisible, right? Other than I can sort of say, well, here's the sample code. Right. What does it actually do? Because early stage investors and customers get excited by physical things they can touch. Yep. And I'm asked for a demo all the time. I'm like, well, what do you mean by a demo? I can show you the code, but there's nothing to demo. It's a platform. Other than demoing our customers and applications. And so I've had to really kind of think through, how do you spin up this flywheel? It's a little bit of a two-sided market strategy. So while I'm thinking about, I guess, the capabilities that the developers need, or I should say my partner's thinking about stuff like that, I think about some of the whole product elements around that. How do we provide a great developer experience? What sort of samples do we need? What messaging do we need? How do we get people excited about this? We've had to play with business model a little bit. Do we need a free trial, for example, or freemium model? Yeah, does that make sense? And in the beginning, well, we're still kind of toying with it in terms of deciding what the right approach is, but we're looking at other examples in the space and understanding how developers operate. Not every platform has to be freemium. And it's the right thing for us. We're sort of still deciding that. But then the other question is, can I drive more demand from the other side? So it's playing, even though they're not our customers specifically yet, can I go to health systems and healthcare systems and go, well, we enable apps. And of course, the question always is going to be, well, what apps do you build? Well, actually, here's what's the magical thing is I have this infinite developer team because they don't work for me. They're all these other companies. So what do you want? What spaces can we operate in? Here's an example of another hospital leverage one of these applications. should we talk about bringing this application to your health system? And how about our customers with the selling process itself to drive demand back in? The other angle on this is working with organizations that curate innovation. So say accelerators and venture funds, and say, selfishly, I'd love for your next cohort of companies to have more people in healthcare. Now, we make that easier. And I can tell you that sometimes people are a bit gun shy of going to healthcare because they think it's hard. If you help me tell that story, I can help you get great companies and get them to market faster, which is what you want. So we're leveraging all these channels to kind of build out what we know is a new ecosystem. We're at the beginning. We have no blinders on that at all. But that's kind of the fun part too, right? The potential is pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So want to watch your time, be mindful of your time here, Val. Just a couple more pieces to wrap up here. So you hinted a little bit earlier. Can you talk a little bit about the technology? Like, what are some of the key technologies that you guys are leveraging to build this platform?
Yeah, sure. So there's two that kind of make up for what we do. And the first is inspired by things we've seen in other industries. So the thing that kind of made us take notice of this opportunity is, as I mentioned, platform companies have made the development of applications really easy. It's amazing. Like, you don't need to have a master's degree in computer science to build a simple application anymore.
Donald Rumsfeld has an application on iPhone now.
There you go.
A Churchill Solitaire. So there you go.
Yeah,
if he can do an app,
everybody can do it. But what's interesting is that as soon as you have an application that deals in health data, half of those platforms don't work. And so you can't use like a typical platform service.
They get blocked out by the
because they don't have the compliance
privacy,
with these laws.
Security. Yeah.
Now, can you solve that problem on your own? Yes, you can, right? You go down a few layers in the stack, down to the Amazon layer, for example, and then you go, okay, I'm going to build all these developer operations on top for robustness and security, privacy management, auditing, logging, backup, access control, legal rights.
And you haven't even gotten to your application.
And you haven't gotten to your application yet.
That's just laying the foundation for your house.
And that takes a lot of effort. And so we said, well, why? We know people like using platforms. Not everybody wants to operate at the bare metal. Right? They want to focus on things that make them different. So platforms are a proven business model. There isn't one in healthcare. So can we build that for healthcare? And so we call ourselves a little bit the Heroku for healthcare. So we have a developer operations management layer through containers that we sit on top of this third-party infrastructure where we manage all of these rules around how we protect the data, how we segment the data, where we anonymize and sanitize the data, containerization, access control, auditing, logging, backups, all this other stuff, in line and completely prescribed by the way the regulations are written out, as well as smart security practices based on my partner's long experience doing stuff like this. And then we watch the regulations and we adopt the technology as the regulations change. But for our developer partners, it's a simple API. Store your data here, you're done. The other piece that they need is if they're selling into a healthcare system and the healthcare system ever gets audited, and you just got to open up the news, there is a major crackdown happening on HIPAA in the US right now. We're talking hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of dollars in fines to health systems that don't properly manage their data. And so if they're leveraging an application, obviously the CIOs and information security officers in these institutions are very wary of this, about this stuff, because not only from a monetary perspective, but also from a PR perspective and responsible management of the population. The vendors they work with will need to meet those same requirements too. So there's an increasing pressure on the developer community to be compliant coming from the hospitals. And so what they need to prove to show that they are compliant, because even compliance is a bit of a misnomer. There isn't a certification. It's audit readiness is how we call it. It's policy documentation. So we provide all the policy documentation for our cloud service, ready written for the developers to have on hand in their files. And then that's the first half of our proposition. The second is this question around integration, which is something or interoperability is what they call it. It's something the health tech industry has been struggling with for a long time. How do we make it easier, whether doing custom code development, to get an app to speak to the back end at an institution? Some of our competitors have taken the approaches saying they're going to brute force it. They're building massive teams to do custom code development, which doesn't scale. And others sort of try to take a platform approach, which is, given some of their experience, we have one partner that's very experienced in the space. They have a bit of a platform approach to solve it. We've taken a different tact, which is there's an industry standard that is not vendor specific. It's vendor agnostic. It's an open standard being created by the HL7, which is the digital health sort of consortium. That's kind of for the first time very digital and platform friendly. It's called FHIR, Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And FHIR is not only a data standard, but it actually makes a really great database. So we said, why wouldn't, again, picking up on inspiration from other developer environments, what would happen if we just offered a database structure to our developer partners? And so we offer FHIR as a data format, which covers almost everything you could do in healthcare. It's hundreds of lines long in terms of data elements. So when the applications leverage FHIR as a data format, they're taking advantage of the fact that the EMR vendors and the hospitals and other players in the industry are implementing FHIR interfaces into their EMRs, and then integration becomes really easy. And we've seen it already happen. That's one thing that's very unique about our product versus our competitors.
That's awesome. So give me, before we switch off of the product piece, can you give me maybe 2 examples of the types of applications that your partners or your customers are building with the platform?
There's a couple that we're really proud of. So one that we're working with is a product in the neonatal intensive care space. So children that are born prematurely that have to spend a bit of time in the hospital, there's a bit of a unique aspect in that, in the sense that the moms are usually at home and the kids are in the hospital being taken care of in their very early days. And so anybody who's a parent would know that the most important thing you can give to a child is breast milk. But because the mom is not there, there's all these logistics that have to be managed around this stuff. So we're working with an early stage company called Keratin, and they have a platform that uses a cloud service to track which bottle from which mother to which baby, and how was it consumed, and when was it consumed, and then providing that feedback back to the mom through a consumer app the mom has on her phone. And
peace of mind for the mother.
Exactly. Well, and it's done some very, very clever things, like sending the messages at exactly the right time to the mom so that she has an emotional response and expresses more milk. And very, very interesting idea. And so they're running on our platform to manage the private health information and integration into the hospital's back end. So that's one example. Another example, we're working with another startup in the sports medicine space. And they've actually been in market for a little while, where they offer a platform that allows the prediction of burnout and injury amongst athletes for sports teams, and then they have an expansion into spaces that require that information to be shared with healthcare providers. And so they've leveraged our platform as a way of protecting that data and showing compliance in those situations. So it's actually quite across the board. We're working with behavioral health, working with scheduling, working with chronic care management, working with cancer recovery. But all of the common thread amongst these things is it's digital health information that needs to be managed properly. So just before we transfer off the product piece, one of the things that is really intriguing with this is if you're working in financial services or you're working in packaged goods or manufacturing, sometimes it's hard to see the impact that you're having on the universe, right? Betterment of mankind kind of thing. So it must feel good to be working in something like healthcare, where you can see a direct benefit to humanity, so to speak, than coming up with the next cute points card for a checking account or something, right? You get a sense of that as well, working in the healthcare space. Actually, and so people ask me the question all the time: why now? You've been in the industry for so long. You've got all these connections. Why entrepreneurship now? Why didn't you do it before? And I don't know how premeditated it was, but I think about it and I say, well, I think the answer is I wanted something that, if I'm going to take this journey, I want it to be something that really matters. And there's no greater problem the world faces now than healthcare at all. We have an aging population. We have rampant chronic disease. We have we have rising costs of our healthcare system, both in Canada and the US and other parts of the world, extremely long wait times. And it's frustrating to tell the story in the simplest way that I can, that in this digital world we live in, which I know you and I are very, very appreciative of, where we've got applications, cloud services, big data, analytics, sensors, wearables, it just goes on and on, all these smart things that when I go to my doctor says, Bao, tell me what happened to you in the last 6 months.
Exactly.
Let's tease that apart. In there is a risk that it's just based on my memory, based on my mood, based on my honesty.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that those things will ever go away, but why can we not leverage digital, which has the ability to connect to me and record data seamlessly and easily when I'm not sitting in the clinic?
Exactly.
And so that's kind of how we want to change healthcare. So our long-term vision for what we're trying to do with MedStack is the idea of prescription apps.
Nice.
We know that, especially when you're managing chronic conditions, medication, rehab, therapy, exercises, and medical devices are prescribed by healthcare providers to people to use in their home to get better or to stave off furtherment of their conditions. Why couldn't a digital app do that? Yeah. And it absolutely could, but people don't think of it because it hasn't been curated within the healthcare industry. And so it's probably a little more than just saying, I want my Fitbit to be able to help me out. Yeah. But that's a good analogy. Really, it's more around applications that have been specifically designed to be prescribed by healthcare providers to patients. And so if we do this correctly and we have the ability to audit the applications, to subject them to medical research, we can bring in a third player into this ecosystem, which is the insurance company. Yeah. Nice. And now, just like how medication and medical devices can be subsidized, both at the manufacturing level and at the patient level, we can do the same with developers and applications. Yep. And so this is a conversation we've started having with some of these providers. And I mean, what better way to change the world? Yeah, so that's what definitely awesome. Excites me.
Yeah, so why don't we close out, even though you're not a product guy, let's say there's people out there that have been involved in product, product management, product marketing, business development, and they're curious about whether they have what it takes to jump into entrepreneurship. Like, what would you say? I know it's early on for you, but what would you say are the top three things that could help you be ready for for somebody to make that kind of move?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is don't think of it as an orthogonal change. Think of it as an evolution. I leverage my career in every step that I take. And I realize that entrepreneurship, it's a misnomer to say entrepreneurship is defined by corporate structure. Oh, we are an independent, incorporated company and I'm the CEO, so therefore I'm an entrepreneur. Yep. You can be an entrepreneur in anything you do. Entrepreneurship is being willing to be really practical about the data you do have, curious about data you don't have, and gutsy about risks when you operate in an uncertain environment. That can be just as true in a massive corporation as it can as an independent consultant, as it can when you're in a startup company or even running a startup company yourself. So don't forget that stuff and figure out where you came from and how you can leverage it. Focus on something that excites you. Don't say, I want to be an entrepreneur for being an entrepreneur. I'll just come up with some idea. Because you got to care. You got to care. You got to have to have insight in terms of what you're doing and how you leverage that. So for me, it's platforms, and for my partner, it's healthcare applications. Yep. And then just be prepared to soldier ahead when things change all around you.
Yeah, deal with those sleepless nights. So Bal, it sounds like there's a riot brewing outside our room here. So I think we're going to move to close here. But I want to thank you again for taking the time. I know our listeners are really going to enjoy this discussion. As I always like to do, if somebody hears something and it piques and they want to follow up with you, anything you're comfortable sharing in terms of how to follow you or how to get a hold of you?
Yeah. I guess a few things I would provide. You can find me on Twitter at Balaji Gopalan 73. Certainly, I'm always happy to talk about my work in the education institution, brainstation.io. And with respect to the company, we are at medstack.co as well on Twitter at MedStack.
Awesome. So thanks, Bal. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Alan.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Today's episode was sponsored by Under 10 Playbook. dedicated to helping you define and deliver the right product right. Try it for free at www.under10playbook.com/readyproductradio.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Ready Product Radio, part of the Ready PDM network. This is when most podcasters ask you to leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. My only request is if you found the show entertaining, inspiring, or informative, please share it with a colleague or friend who may feel the same way. Also, note that the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect my views or the views of the Ready PDM network. If you want yourself or your product to be ready, then keep your eyes on your markets, your ears to your customers, your mind on their experiences, both good and bad, and finally, keep your hearts on your products. Until next time, thank you for listening. You can contact us on Twitter at Ready Product Radio. That's RDYPRODUCTRADIO. And on the web at www.readyproductradio.com.
Gee, Jane, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.